Do you hear that? That's been the soundtrack for the last 8 days. I'm really hoping today is the last day. There are power crews out in front of our house, but yeah, I'm hoping today's the last day. Let's talk more about that.
Well, hello friends, and welcome to At What Cost. We did not get power back that day. In fact, it was another full day before we got power back. Let me start by giving the disclaimer that we experienced a Category 1 hurricane on the early morning hours of September 27th. We were without power and cell service and internet for several days. In fact, we didn't even really know what was happening in North Carolina until several days after it happened. And then we just experienced Hurricane Milton in Florida, which is not too far from us, but thankfully we didn't have anything kind of coming off of that tropical storm wise here. But if you saw my Instagram post, this is not a competition to see who has it worse, and I certainly am not attempting to diminish any of the experiences that others who have had very challenging circumstances due to either Hurricane Helene or Hurricane Milton. This is not an attempt to diminish those experiences. Hard is hard no matter how you slice it. So what we're going to talk about in this video really is about our own experience here within our home, our resources, our family dynamic, the things that worked well for us, the lessons I've learned on the other side of this. And not everything we talk about is really intended as a you should do this or do that. We are going to cover a lot of stuff about minimalism because it had a huge impact on how we navigated the days of pretty much living on the Oregon Trail for like 9 full days. And even how the hurricane now, almost 2 full weeks, well, yeah, it is 2 weeks later, how we are still really feeling the effects of that. And then toward the end of this video, I'm going to give you some other updates of things that have been going on in our family and another trip that I had taken just before the hurricane hit. So make sure you stick around till the end. So around 3:30 a.m. on Friday, September 27th, I woke up to just like the loudest rain and wind I think I've ever really heard. Well, I know it is because I've never lived through a Category 1 hurricane, and that's exactly what came over our town. The news reports in the days that followed kind of explained that we didn't even get like the eye of the hurricane. We got the worst part, which was the east side of it, which I guess they call the dirty side, and I know why now. So around 3 a.m., I kind of woke my husband up and was like, hey, this is getting a little scary out here. Like I can see the trees blowing, the trees, we have some really tall pine trees behind our house and they're kind of backlit by a major road. And so I could see a lot of movement and I was getting kind of nervous. The rain was hitting the house really hard. And he, of course, was mostly asleep and was like, no, don't worry about it. It's just a tropical storm. We had been watching the forecast before we went to bed and knew that it was going to be making landfall and that we were going to have some tropical storm weather afterwards. This happens pretty frequently. That was when we went to bed. When we got up at 3:30 in the morning, that was a very different situation. By 4:30, our power was out, which again woke me up. I kind of had gone back to sleep. It woke me up, woke my husband up, and it was getting really, really windy. So around 5, we decided we were going to take the kids downstairs. By around 5:30, we were ushering the kids into our closet underneath the stairs. It's really the central point of our house. It doesn't everywhere else in our house has windows or exterior walls. So it is the lowest, most central part of our home. And because we did not have any power, we also did not have any real cell service at that point, we couldn't really see any new weather updates. We knew that things would be moving through us around 6:30. It should be sort of all moving past us. But at that point, again, we were thinking, this is just a tropical storm. We were concerned actually at that point that there were tornadoes, and that was what we were hearing kind of hitting the side of the house or different sounds. But ultimately, it was really, really loud, and we really could not figure out what was happening outside. So we kind of packed everybody in the closet under the stairs and just hunkered down and waited it out. So by 6:30, quarter to 7, everything had pretty much calmed down. It started getting daylight within about 30 minutes or so. And we looked out the window and there were just a lot of leaves down and some sticks in the yard. We didn't have any big trees down. A neighbor across the street lost their tree. And ultimately we were thinking like, man, that was a really rough thunderstorm. That was rough. We could see transformers. They give a very distinct green glow in the sky when they blow. And so we knew that we had lost power, that there had to have been some things happening, but the extent of the damage, we had absolutely no idea. So around 7:30, our neighbor came over in his raincoat and he was like, hey, do you have a number for a roofing company? I got to call somebody. I got a tree on my house. And then he talked about how there was another tree down on our road and that people were going into the person's yard to get past it. But again, we did not have an understanding of how bad it really was. So all day Friday, we were just in recovery mode, trying to clean up a little bit, figuring out what we're going to do without power for the day, trying to touch base with friends. And by Friday afternoon, it became very clear that this was not what we thought it was. Saturday morning, we ventured out. We were going to go to a grocery store. We were trying to find better cell service. We would intermittently get messages in or out. It would be delayed and then some things would fail. And so we decided Saturday morning we were going to venture out and try and get some better cell service and go to like Publix or Kroger or someplace. As we came out of our little neighborhood onto more of a main road, we realized what they were talking about. So on the main road leading into our neighborhood, every single power pole was down and many of the trees had fallen across the road or onto people's homes or cars. They were just everywhere. We made it to Publix. We could tell right away, like, this is gonna be, we're in it for the long haul. So my husband went in, the kids and I stayed in the car. And at one point he said, you might want to turn the car off and roll the windows down. I'm probably gonna be in line for about an hour. So the line was wrapped twice around the inside of the building for him to even check out. And at that point, he just grabbed what he could hold. And some friends of ours had said that they had gone toward the Atlanta area to try and find gas, and they had a generator. They were trying to find gas for their generator. None of the gas stations are open because they have no power. So at that point, we decided we would also head west, and we drove about an hour and a half. We're able to find Lowe's that no one had kind of gotten to yet. And we purchased a generator, went to pick it up, and while we were there waiting for them to bring it out for pickup, they sold out of all of the other generators that they had. So people were definitely finding their way out looking for things. We were able to get plenty of gas and groceries. That was really helpful. We're going to talk more about the groceries in a little bit. And we went and got the kids some smoothies because they needed a little morale boost, and they got to eat McDonald's on the way home. So they were very excited for some good creature comforts. They were done with having cereal and PB&Js. So we made the way home and got the generator going, plugged our refrigerators and our freezer in. And it is just a miracle that they were all still within safe limits and we didn't have to throw anything away. It was truly a miracle, because at that point we had been without power for at least, it was more than 24 hours, and our refrigerators should have been well above the safe range, but they held tight and we did not open them. We took a lot of precautions. Our chest freezer was very full, which I now know will hold usually for about 48 hours. So it was just a miracle that we did not lose anything in our refrigerators. So we began trying to touch base with friends and just letting people know where we were. We still did not have cell service at our house, but if we went out to, like, Sunday morning, we had church unplugged. So there was just a small group of us that met in our church sanctuary. It was wonderful. There were these lovely cool breezes. The building felt great. We had a really good church service, and it was exactly what we needed to kind of motivate us to go into the week, because at that point we were notified from Georgia Power that our power would not be restored until at least October 7th. They canceled school for the week, and at that point we were just focused on surviving, making sure that we had all the things that we needed, that other people had the things that they needed. At one point, my husband and a group of neighbors from not just on our street, but all over our neighborhood really had heard that Georgia Power was looking for low-hanging fruit. So if they could not get into your neighborhood, they would have to send a tree crew first to remove trees so that they'd be able to work on the lines. And our neighbor, he said something that I won't forget. I wrote it down. I was trying to keep some notes because I will do some writing about this at some point. But he had gathered a group of guys together. My husband he has a larger truck, and so he took his chainsaw and his truck, and they cleared all of the downed trees that were on the main road leading into our neighborhood. Later on, my husband was recalling to me, like, the things that were happening. Like, people were bringing them water and bringing them food. Somebody stopped by. They had gone to Walmart and gotten a plate of food and were bringing them food, and there was a real sense of community there. And we asked our neighbor later on, how did you know all those people? Because they were not people that live like in our general area. They were in more of our extended neighborhood. And he said, oh, I didn't know them. Once I heard from Georgia Power that they were looking for trees to get cleared, I just started knocking on doors, and I just talked to them like we were old friends. And so I was thinking, isn't that how we should be approaching people? Is like, even strangers, we should be approaching them like they're old friends, especially in our community, because when your cell service is cut off and you don't really have access to things outside of your immediate home, you really do have nothing else but your neighbors. Like, that's what's happening in your town, are the people that you're connecting with. So we were without power. They never did shut our water off. So we had plenty of water. We took many cold showers. Sometimes they were very welcomed at the end of a hot day with no air conditioning and it being in the upper 80s. We were without power for 9 full days. But honestly, we could have gone longer if we needed to. And unfortunately, some of the people in our town are still without power, and it has been 2 weeks. So let's talk about how minimalism has really helped in this situation. First off, our downstairs closet was our kind of safe shelter, and that is the closet that before minimalism, I would have been ripping things out of that closet and pushing them into other rooms just to try to get our family in a safe place. But because of minimalism, I have reduced down a lot of the inventory that we keep in our home. We don't keep as many things on hand, and I don't need as much storage space. And so that closet, albeit not super comfortable for 5 people and a dog, certainly was a safe place for us to be when we needed it. I also had to rely on hand washing dishes and finding ways to wash and dry clothes frequently. This was my downfall before minimalism. I would let laundry pile up and pile up and pile up because we had enough clothes that we could still wear clean clothes while I let the laundry pile up. So having a limited wardrobe really forced us to stay on top of doing laundry. When the power did come back on, I didn't have 20 loads of laundry piled up around my house, stinking my house up while the power's out. and overwhelming me when the power does come back on with all of this laundry to do. Now, we did discover that our generator was powerful enough to run our washing machine, so I could run a quick load. I did the very quick load laundry with low water, and so I was able to do laundry every couple of days, and then we hung a clothesline in the backyard. And I was the minimalism side didn't help this, but the desire to have pretty spaces did. I had a canister of clothespins in my laundry room that I never hang clothes with, but I had them for decoration in this canister, and I was able to use those to hang laundry. So that was just kind of a funny, like, make sure you're balanced in this. It's okay for you to have some decor items. Maybe make sure they're functional. The other benefit we had with minimalism is that I could find everything we needed when we needed it. We needed shoes. We found the shoes quickly. We needed flashlights and batteries. We knew exactly where they were. Cords for charging, power blocks, all of those things were where we needed them to be. I wasn't digging all over my house trying to find the things that we needed. And along with that, this was kind of unexpected. My house was very predictable in the dark. I wasn't tripping over stuff, and even with limited light, I could still see the clear paths. I wasn't tripping over furniture. There wasn't a bunch of stuff out of place. There weren't things piled up somewhere. We had plenty of space to navigate around in our house. And along those same lines, we had space to add foods that we typically don't eat because we tend to eat more fresh foods and stuff in the refrigerator. And I don't keep a ton of canned and shelf-stable foods, but I had space to add all of those things when we did need to live like that. Our house was easy to clean. And environmentally, just with all of the overwhelm and the stress of having this event and not having power, and the kids are home, with all of the stress of that, the environmental stress in our home, just the living in our home, was way low. It was easy to clean. It didn't feel cluttered. I felt like I had less decisions to make. So even though our house temperature-wise was a lot warmer than it typically would be, it didn't feel like claustrophobic or cumbersome or stuffy. It just felt like our house. So at this point, because the power is back on, I sort of anticipated that things would go back to normal pretty quickly, and I could not have been more wrong. So let's talk about some of the things that I wish that I would have done, things I would do differently now having gone on the other side of this, and things that ended up being pretty significant, but I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back on it now, I know, like, that's key. I need to remember that. So things that I wish I would have done. Cord management. If you have a generator, it is a great benefit, but you probably know if you've had to use it in these situations that you tend to have extension cords running all over the place. Moving cords and like pushing them out of the way or almost tripping on them did get just a little bit stressful sometimes. I wish I would have taken the weather a little bit more seriously. Now, this was an unprecedented event. There was not a lot of anticipation that Helene would move the way that it did and that it would hit our area as a Category 1. So it's not that I didn't take the weather seriously, but I anticipated that it would be a tropical storm that was very similar to what we had experienced in the past. So had I known at that time that it was actually going to come our way and that we were going to be more affected, we would have made sure that we had a generator and plenty of gas cans, that I had shelf-stable foods. I would have liked to have been a little bit more prepared. Now, that being said, I think it's important because I didn't want to be like milk sandwich, the sky is falling because we're having a tropical storm. There is a tendency, I think, in in us to feel like this is going to happen. We have to be afraid. We have to make sure that we get all the things that we need. And so we clean out the grocery store from milk and bread, and then nothing really happens. I certainly don't want to have a sky is falling kind of mentality, but making sure that our cars are full of gas, that we did have gas cans that had gas in them, and being more intentional in that way. Now, it just so happened that both my husband and I had refilled our gas in the Wednesday and Thursday before the storm. That was not an intentional thing, but it was a great blessing from the Lord. Something else that I sort of wish I would have done earlier is to change my perspective. In the 7 years that we have lived in this house, we have lost power for a total of probably 3 hours. Prior to this storm, we had never experienced an extended power loss. So the first day or two, I really anticipated that the power would be back on quickly, that I didn't really need to make a whole lot of long-term plans, that yes, this was bad, but they would get the power back on quickly. And that was just not the case. And sometimes our perspective or our expectations can really lead to a lot of disappointment, especially when other people's power starts coming back on and yours doesn't. So just really being mindful of my expectations and my perspectives a lot sooner in the game, and just really considering those through prayer and asking God to guide and lead those expectations and perspectives a lot earlier on in the game. I would have preferred to do that. All right, so let's talk about, what's the matter, Gunner? You heard me say all right and you thought we was getting ready to go somewhere and do something? We're not doing nothing. We're just talking to our friends. Gunner did just fine through the storm, by the way. I think, were you happy to have all your people home? Yeah. So let's talk about things that just did not matter. First off, my routines. My routines around quiet time, laundry, dishes, meal planning, all of the ways that I live from a day-to-day basis just did not matter when the lights went out. It just did not matter. Those were the very first things that had to be adjusted. So all of a sudden, overnight, I am cooking 3 meals a day in my home, which I typically do not do. Pretty much from 7 to 7, I don't have any lights on. I don't have any natural daylight coming in. So staying up late to do something requires significant planning to make sure that I have a battery-powered light or a rechargeable light, or something has been charged and I have the ability to use it. So just trying to be in our regular routines just was not happening. So the other thing that really stopped mattering were all of the plates that I'm typically spinning. So messages from school, messages from work, extracurricular activities, all of those things just didn't matter at that point. I didn't have the capacity to do that. I work remote, so I did not have internet and I did not have power. So it didn't matter how much I wanted to work. I couldn't. And trust me, friends, I wanted to work. I am not about the off-grid lifestyle. It's just not for me. The other thing that really stopped mattering were all of my personal preferences and comforts. When you're just trying to make sure that your basic needs are met and the basic needs of others around you are met, things like your preference of music during the church service doesn't really matter anymore. Whether or not I have a hot cup of coffee in the morning also does not matter anymore. It's like all of those little personal preferences and comfort items, they are the things that really drive a lot of the routines and the expectations that we have of the way that we engage with things. So things like our church meeting without a microphone and just with the piano, and our worship leader trying to sing as loudly as she can to lead everybody through worship, really having to sit closer to one another and toward the front so that we can hear. It just was very different than our regular church experience, but it was so good. And as the noise was sort of drowned out in the silence of not having any power or cell service or any of the other things, it really gave an opportunity for the really important things to kind of rise to the surface. So being with people, worshiping together, and just having our sense of community, it's what came to the top. All of those personal preferences and comforts just sort of went out the window. Okay, so let's talk about the significant things that I had not thought about until afterwards. Number one, not having enough groceries after the power went back on. So all along with my routines, all of our grocery stores, not all of them had power back. Some of them had to restock a lot of their inventory. And so my typical routine of doing a grocery pickup at the beginning of the week that's according to my meal plan, all of those things just stopped happening. So just because our power was back on and we were ready to get back into everyday life, our routines and the things that are sort of staples in our home were just not happening. And then because of catching up with things like doctor's appointments that had been missed, significant appointments, doctor's appointments that had been missed, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the video, just catching up on everything. I even had limited opportunity at that point to go do grocery shopping. So not only were our regular routines impacted during the hurricane and in the immediate days following that, but even now, 2 weeks out, we're still not running like we normally would be. Some other things that I did not think about was the significance of feeling overwhelmed when we get back into the regular rhythms of life, specifically with our kids. Now, our 2 older boys have some sensory processing troubles anyway, but being in a dimly lit house that's very quiet, without a lot of external noise and visual stimulation, the ceiling fan's not running, the refrigerator's not humming, the TV isn't going off, everything is sort of slowing down, and the stimulation is really, really low. And so when all of that stuff starts coming back on again, even myself, I started to feel very overwhelmed with all of the things that were happening around us. And I think that environmental kind of stress also amped up some of that. So I'm really thankful that we did keep up on some of our routines, because having so many more piles of laundry or piles of dishes or tons of trash because we decided to use paper instead of dishes, having all of that extra stuff, I feel like it would have just added to the overwhelm. So it was really significant that we maintained some of the routines that we could during that time, but also that we sort of take a personal inventory when we need to start unplugging from some things again. I also underestimated how much I rely on my cell service to be not just for entertainment. I think when we start wanting to decrease our screen time, it's because we're using our cell phone a lot for entertainment, security, comfort. But just in general, I rely on my cell phone for a lot of things. There were questions that our kids would ask and my husband and I wouldn't have the answer. And our first thought was like, well, let's ask the internet. We don't have internet. There's no way to know this answer right now. So just our connectedness to the outside world was greatly diminished, and I didn't anticipate some of that. It also really reminded me how significant personal face-to-face relationships with people are. When the whole internet world goes down, those personal face-to-face relationships are the ones that are left. It's all that really matters. It's the only tangible thing that you have in front of you now. And so really fostering and cultivating those relationships was just a lot more important than I thought that it was. And the last thing that was really significant that I had not thought about was the importance of planning for emergencies, but as a minimalist. So in looking at some of the resources out there now for hurricane preparation, when I'm looking at the resources, half the things on that list we lived without for 9 days and we were totally fine. Do I actually need all of those things? What does actually constitute an emergency for us? And how can we be better prepared for that? Personally, I don't want like the prepper closet with 6 months of food that I have to then rotate in and out. I don't want a big bin of stuff that I have to manage and batteries that I have to turn over. But there may be some things that might have been a lot more helpful, like having an emergency meal plan for the next 7 days, so that when we did get to a grocery store and we could buy groceries, I knew what I needed. We were just sort of flying blind and just grabbing any shelf-stable things that we thought we could. But we ran into problems like buying a bunch of hamburger helper, not realizing we had no hamburger in our freezer. The store was not selling any hamburger, and half of those hamburger helpers need milk, and we didn't have any of that either. So trying to make sure that we have the right things when we need them is essential. Okay, so now let me share some of our other updates. So big update for our family. Our older son was diagnosed with epilepsy last year in October, right around the end of October. Our middle son, just a few weeks ago, had a grand mal seizure at the dentist office. It was very scary. But he has been experiencing what we thought were tics up until just a few days ago, actually. But now, in light of the seizure and having an EEG, it's actually become more apparent that those were not actually tics, but were more likely seizures. So we have spent a significant amount of this time to just monitoring him and adjusting medication and making sure that what we're doing is working. And I did share some of that on our community page. And I just really appreciate all of the prayers and the suggestions about diets and different things, your experiences with epilepsy. I just really appreciate your willingness to share those things with us. This is definitely not something we anticipated, and we're not super familiar with it. So our older son has not had any seizures since the big episode that he had last year in October, and he has been on medication and has done wonderfully with it. Our middle son has taken a lot more adjusting to get to where we need to be and really understanding neurologically what's going on with him. But it looks like we're in a pretty good place right now, but I'm definitely open to suggestions. So if you have a child with epilepsy, especially if they have maybe some other things happening, we also have some other special needs, and so that can sometimes complicate things, but I am definitely open to suggestion. Now, if you also saw my Instagram post the weekend before the hurricane, I think, yes, the weekend before, I traveled to Nashville for the weekend for a writer's retreat. So I have been in this writing group for the last 2 years. I know I've mentioned before that I am working on a book, so stay tuned for that. I have been writing a book proposal. If you or someone you know knows a literary agent, please send them my way. Because I am looking to get published at some point. But I have been in this writing group, and it is just such a blessing. And we decided that we had a retreat the first year when we were organized through this author, that we were going to do another retreat now that we are just sort of organized on our own. And it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. We were so encouraged by one another and just spurred on in our writing. And we had just some of the coolest things happen, just great meals and fellowship time together. We had a time of worship on Sunday. And then we also had a house concert from Sky Peterson, which was totally unexpected and was actually sort of on my bucket list. I had seen Andrew Peterson in concert around Easter time last year, and his daughter Sky was there. And I thought, this is so, like, I love her music. I'd never heard it. This is so different. And just the level of wisdom in her lyrics. And I appreciate really good theologically sound music. And so she mentioned that she did house concerts. And so I had made the suggestion that our home group or someone in our women's ministry, like, we should get together and have a house concert. But I had totally forgotten about it until we got to Nashville and we were having worship time together and we sang one of her songs in worship. And it dawned on me, like, oh, we should have asked if she would come and do a house concert. And it just so happened that one of the gals in our group knows her personally and was able to call and ask her. And she came over and did a house concert. And it was unbelievable. It was so good. it was just such a great experience. And I was really encouraged in my writing. I am excited about doing some more writing. I'm really excited about getting back into YouTube. Now that things are sort of settling down, every time I say that, I feel like they blow up again. Sarah Walton, if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should. She had a quote. I'm gonna have to look it up now so I can share it with you and make sure that I'm sharing the right thing with y'all. So she put a quote up on Instagram the other day, and it said, "This life is an ocean of difficulty with islands of ease, not the other way around. If we get that wrong, then we'll battle resentment and question God's goodness every time the seas get rough." And it just resonated so deeply with me. We have all of these things going on. There is so much more going on in our little home, in our community, than whatever I could never share all of the little nuanced things that happen that can be sort of disruptive. But having a good connected community to point us back to Christ and to bear our burdens with us has just been so incredible. And so having that in my sort of writing life and the creativity and being able to spur one another on and be there together in person was just such an invaluable experience. I absolutely love it. I'm going to link to all the gals that I can, because they're all writers too. In fact, one of them has a book coming out in April, and I cannot wait to start sharing it with you guys. You are going to love it. It is going to be so good. So I can't wait to start sharing that with you, but I'll link whatever I can in the description here. I share a lot of their stuff on Instagram, so you'll be able to look out for that. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, you may want to go do that. If Instagram is not your thing, I'm also on Facebook, and they post on the same things there. So I would really encourage you to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of our upcoming content. And thanks so much for watching. And until I see you again, keep fighting the good fight.